Hi, welcome to the Thrive Today workshop. My name is Kim Shannon, and I am a certified master coach with the WildFit program and a Diabetes 180 facilitator. And today I want to talk to you about how you can start to develop some good habits when it comes to improving your health. You know, a while back, I was on my way to work, and it was on one of those cold and damp and clammy kind of mornings, and I thought, you know what I would love right now that might warm me up is a cup of tea. But I was on my way to work, so I couldn't really make one at home, and I knew that I was going to be driving by a Starbucks. Now, the problem with me and Starbucks is that I find them very intimidating. I don't speak their language. I don't understand the words. I don't know what a frappuccino, mochaccino, I don't know what any of that is. And so I struggle with buying anything from Starbucks. However, a friend of mine had introduced me to the Starbucks app. Now, I know there's apps out there for almost everything, but I was really excited about this app because it meant that I could order my tea exactly the way I wanted to without having to talk to a human being and not being made to feel like I was a dummy. And I know they didn't do that intentionally. I know that was on me, but that's how I felt. So that's what I did. I ordered my tea and I got in my car and I drove to Starbucks. And by the time I got there, my tea was ready. This particular morning, the barista handed me the tea, and then she said, by the way, we mistakenly made this, and I don't even know what it was. It might have been a frappa, mocha, kappa something. And I just wondered if you wanted it. And I looked at it, and whatever it was she had in her hand was very chocolatey and had lots of whipped cream, and I'm sure it tasted delicious. But I said, no, thanks. And I drove on. And I had one of those one of those wow moments. Wow, how did I turn down this lovely looking drink that probably was going to taste delicious when in the past I would have absolutely said yes? And that's what I want to talk to you about today is how to develop those habits, because that's exactly what it was. It was now my habit to not drink those kinds of things and to not accept those kinds of free offerings. So I want to show you how you can start that journey of developing better habits that are in the long run really going to help your health. And we're going to do that by looking at how the food industry has manipulated us over the years. And I'm going to give you some examples and some things that you can look out for. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why and how we have food rules and how to really nail those rules down and maybe how to change some of those rules. And I know there's a bunch of you out there saying, I don't have any rules around food. You do. Let me show you in a few minutes. And then I really want to talk a little bit about willpower and why it doesn't work. And that the way to make those changes is really to look at your mindset and make a change to your mindset rather than to really fight with willpower. And in order to do that, I'm then going to give you some tips that you can walk away with today that you can start immediately if you so choose. And they're really super easy. So let's look at the food industry. Now, if we go back to where did we come from? We came from Africa. So think about the tribes in Africa and how they would have lived. They were hunter-gatherer tribes. They were very nomadic. Whenever the animals were available for hunting, they hunted. When they weren't available for hunting, they didn't hunt. They maybe didn't eat. Or they turned to gathering. They turned to looking at their plants. What could they gather? What could they eat out of that? And if you think about it, they didn't have Costco's. They didn't have grocery stores. They didn't have running water. They didn't have bottles of water. They didn't have refrigerators. They were living a very different life from us. They lived by the way that Mother Nature provided. And when Mother Nature provided fruit, as an example, that fruit came in bright, beautiful colors. And we know this. Oranges are orange, and apples are red or green, and grapes are purple, or some of them are green, and strawberries are red, and blueberries are bluish purple. We know that fruit has a plethora of lovely, fantastic colors. And our ancestors would have known that when they saw that on a bush or a tree or in the ground, when they saw those beautiful colors, they would have known we got to eat that. That's good for us. It's going to help sustain us, but we have to eat it now because it might not be there in another day. The birds might have got to it. They might have rotted on a tree. And again, we don't have a grocery store where we can say, oh, those strawberries were so good, I think I'll go buy more. No, when we eat the strawberries and they're all gone for the year. They won't be back for another year. The food industry understands that that's in our DNA. Our DNA says bright colors, lovely fruit, go eat a lot. And one of the things that the food industry has done is it has taken those colors and put them on all of the boxes of cereal. The next time you go down the cereal aisle, I want you to really pay attention. Just have a scan through the whole aisle. You're going to see a plethora of oranges and yellows and reds and blues and greens. And that's by design, because the food industry knows that when we see those colors, our DNA says, buy that because that's good for us, and buy a lot of it and come back and buy more. And try going down the cereal aisle with your kids. That's going to make it even worse because they also, even though they might not be able to express it the way I just did, also have that DNA. They're attracted. We're all attracted to beautiful colors. So there's one example. Marketing is another example of how we have been, manipulated. I'm going to use that word because that's exactly what marketing is. Let me give you an example. Now, I'm from Canada, and in Canada, we have one of our most beloved coffee shops called Tim Hortons, named after a former NHL hockey player. And there are any number of Tim Hortons that you can find across the country. You can't throw a stone and not hit a Tim Hortons. That's how prevalent they are. And a few years ago, they did a commercial that involved Sidney Crosby and Nathan Horton, both Canadian hockey players, well loved by fans across the country, well known across the country, across the NHL. And in that commercial, they asked kids, how could we get you to play hockey? How could we get you to skate and be on the ice? And the kids said, we want to have puppies. And then another group of kids said, we want piñatas. And then another group of kids said, we want to have whoopee cushions on the goalies. And so they showed a scene where there's all these cute little Labrador puppies on the ice, and the kids are out there and they're having a blast and they're hugging the puppies and they're so cute. And then they show another scene where they're using their hockey sticks to smash these piñatas, and they open up and all these goodies and toys and treats come spilling out onto the ice, and the kids are having a great time. And then they show a third scene where Sidney Crosby is shooting hockey pucks at a goalie, and every time he hits the goalie's pad, a whoopee cushion goes off and there's a farting noise, and the kids are rolling and laughing and having a great time. And the message of the commercial is that Tim Hortons supports children being more active, and that specifically Tim Hortons promotes children playing hockey. And not once in the commercial, not a single time, do they mention that their product. They don't mention their donuts, they don't mention their coffee, they don't mention their bagels, they don't mention their muffins. They just mention that they support children being more active and they support children playing hockey. Isn't that a great message? Isn't that a wonderful company that is spending their own dollars to make sure that kids have opportunities to play hockey and be more active? Well, don't we want our kids to be more active? Well, as you're driving down the road and you're feeling like you might want a coffee and you see his Tim Hortons sign, now maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, your brain is going to go, that's a great company. They support children's hockey. They make sure our kids are active. Our children are important to them. And I'm going to go and support that company by buying their product. Isn't that spectacular marketing where they're getting you to buy their product without even mentioning their product? Wendy's has some commercials out around their beef, their burgers, and how they get their beef from farmers who have free range cattle. And they interview these farmers, and the farmers talk about how they have sustainable farming and how well they treat their cattle and how good of a quality their beef is. and how they actually help the environment by with the free range. It's, you know, the ecosystem continues, and they're very productive. And if you're environmentally friendly, if those are important things to you, then when you've decided that you want to go and get a fast food burger, you might be more inclined to buy a Wendy's burger because they have sustainable farmed beef, they have free range cattle, they have all these things that have really nothing to do with their product other than where the meat came from. So some examples of how we've been manipulated by the food industry. I challenge you, I know a lot of people don't watch live television these days, but I challenge you that if you're watching TV, or if you're driving down the street and you see a billboard, or you're listening to the radio even, to really listen to the food advertisements and get an understanding of how is it that they're marketing this product so that we buy it, because it's really super cool to really examine that. Now, out of that, the food industry has influenced the rules that we use when we are making decisions, particularly around food. Now, let me give you an example of a rule that you might not think you have, but we all have. Red lights. In most countries, a red light means stop, and a green light means go, and a stop sign means stop. So when you're driving and you see that red light, you're going to put your brakes on and you're going to stop your car. Most of us. It's the law, it's a rule, but it's not one that we even think about anymore, right? We just instinctively stop our cars and wait for the light to turn green. Or if we're at a stop sign, we wait for the cars to go by. We wait our turn. The food industry has given us some rules. For instance, Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is all about love, chocolate, flowers. But where did that come from? That came from the food industry. Easter. Easter is a Christian religious holiday that has absolutely nothing to do with chocolate bunnies, chocolate Easter eggs, anything to do with chocolate. That's a food industry manipulation. What I discovered when I was going through my journey, when I started my journey, was that I had a rule around things that were free. And think back to my Starbucks story. I turned down a free chocolatey whipped cream something something. What I discovered when I was going through my journey was that, again, I was at work one day, I was going to lunch, and our lunchroom at the time was a full kitchen. It had a stove and a fridge, microwave, it had everything, the whole works. Now, I had brought my lunch that day, and what I had brought was leftover dinner from the night before. And the night before, we had beautiful piece of steak. I created another little salad. There were some vegetables on the side. It was a great lunch. I couldn't wait to eat it because it was so good last night, right? The night before. I couldn't wait to have it for lunch today. But as I walked into the kitchen, I could smell pizza being warmed up. Now, I like pizza. Most people like pizza to some degree, but what I don't like is leftover pizza. I don't like pizza cold, and I don't like pizza that's been warmed up again in a microwave. But in this case, they were warming the pizza up in the oven. And quite honestly, if I'm going to have leftover pizza, that's the only way I'm going to eat it. The cheese was getting all gooey, the crust was getting a little bit crispy, and it smelled delicious. And as I walked in with my lunch, someone said, Kim, there's lots of pizza here. They had a meeting last night. This was left over from the meeting, and they've left it here for us to eat. Did you want some? I had my lunch, but I was getting an offer of pizza for free, warmed up in the oven. Two of my rules. And that's when I realized that it doesn't matter what I've got with me. If someone's offering me free, I'm probably going to take it. And quite frankly, on that day, I did. I just saved my good lunch for the following day. The problem with rules, and the problem with rules is that they're hard to break, right? You might call them rules, you might call them habits, and realistically, they're shortcuts to decisions, right? When we have these habits or these rules, we're really just making a decision a heck of a lot faster than if we had to every single time examine whether we wanted or didn't want to do something. And Steve Jobs is a great example. If you remember, Steve Jobs wore a black shirt and a pair of jeans to work every day. He just didn't want to worry in the morning about taking the time to decide, what am I wearing to work? Have any of you ever opened your closet and said, I got nothing to wear. I don't know what I'm wearing to work today. I want to wear this blouse, but what pair of pants does it go to? That it takes a lot of time sometimes. It takes a lot of energy sometimes. And so Steve Jobs just cut that all out and said, I'm just going to wear black pant or black turtleneck and jeans to work. And his decision was made like that. That's what habits are. That's what rules are. And sometimes we call them traditions even, right? When we have Christmas dinner, are there certain things that you eat every year when you're with your family because that's just the family tradition? Is there a certain way that we make a certain food because that's grandma's recipe and that's our tradition? Rules, habits, traditions, they are hard to break. They become so entrenched. And the way we do that most often is that we need to use willpower. We need to say, no, stop. I'm not doing that. I have to think about it. And that works in the short term. It's pretty easy to do it once or twice, maybe. For instance, if I said to you, I want you to hold your breath for as long as you can, well, you can do that. You can hold your breath. In fact, when it gets really uncomfortable, you can use willpower to hold your breath for a few more seconds. But ultimately, your body's going to want to breathe. And ultimately, your willpower is going to break and you're going to try and breathe again. And that's what happens when people go on a diet. They use willpower. They use willpower to not eat certain things, to only eat a little bit of this, to only drink that. They have to give up some of their favorite things, and the way they do that is using willpower. It's calorie restricted. You eliminate all of that yummy, yummy stuff, but the problem is that your willpower is going to fail you at some point in time. And I'm going to give you, I don't know if anybody has ever tried the cabbage soup diet. I think it's probably the one and only real true diet that I ever tried. And I thought it was amazing. You know, the reviews were saying you can lose all this weight. It's really quick and it's cabbage. How hard could that be? I think I lasted 2 days. And then the rebel in me said, absolutely not. I am not doing this. I can't stand it anymore. I don't want to ever see cabbage again. So my willpower broke because I just couldn't do it. I just wasn't in the right mindset to make that change. And that's exactly what you need to be in. You need to be in the right mindset in order to make significant changes, especially as today, as we're talking about our health, because we know that willpower isn't going to last. It just doesn't work, not for the long term. And I want to share with you something about how powerful changing your mindset can be. And this story really has nothing to do with nutrition, but it is a really great example of how you can turn things around if you just change your mindset. My husband and I went on a trip to Tahiti, to the French Polynesian, and we had booked this trip actually as we were moving out of COVID at a time when the travel agency was saying, we are going to offer these vacations for dirt cheap because we need people to get back into the travel business. And so we had booked it, and I think we waited about 2 years before we actually went. So we were really looking forward to this. And quite frankly, I had never been to the French Polynesia. One of our stops was going to be Bora Bora. We were going to be on a cruise. And I was just so excited. We were both so excited. And I live, as I said, I live in Canada. So I left from Toronto. We left from Toronto and we went to LA. And then from LA, we flew into Tahiti. It was a very long day of travel. And we got into Tahiti about 10 o'clock at night, and the cruise ship was leaving somewhere around midnight. And where we were sitting on the plane, we were fortunate that we were able to get off the plane pretty quickly, and we went through customs. And then we were standing at the luggage carousel waiting for our luggage to come on. We were so close. We just needed to grab our luggage, get on the bus, and we were going to be on a cruise ship. We couldn't wait. And the luggage, of course, started to come through, and more people started to come in, and people grabbed their bags, and our bags hadn't come yet. And people grabbed more bags, and our bags hadn't come yet. And then people started to leave, and they were getting on these buses. and there was very few bags left coming out. In fact, no new bags were coming out of the carousel. And that moment, that it for me was, I'd never lost my luggage before, but it was that moment that I had always dreaded. It was, I always had butterflies in my stomach waiting for luggage. What if it doesn't come? What if it doesn't come? Well, this was the day that it didn't come. So I said to my husband, well, I guess we better find out how we find our luggage. Like, where is it? And so off he trotted to talk to somebody in charge to see what we could do about that. And of course, I'm going through a gamut of emotions. I'm panicking. I'm angry. I'm in disbelief. This isn't happening. This isn't fair. All of those things went through my head. And then I stopped and I thought, a friend of mine had said to me at one point, everything that happens to you is a story. And what you can do when you're controlling what's happening to you is decide, how do you want to be portrayed in this story? And I thought, I'm going to go home at some point and I'm going to tell the story of how my luggage got lost. Do I want to be a bitter woman who didn't enjoy the vacation of a lifetime because my luggage got lost? Or do I want to flip the script a little bit? Do I want to change my mindset? And I started to think, what's in my carry-on? And I realized that I had done a really good job of packing both mine and my husband's carry-on. I actually, for the first time ever, had packed pajamas. I never packed pajamas, and I struggled to sleep without pajamas. I packed pajamas. And we had bathing suits and extra shorts and a few extra pairs of underwear, and I had another pair of shoes and another dress that I could wear. And because we had upgraded our flights at one point, we actually had a care package that had, of all things, toothpaste and toothbrush. Oh, I realized I was saved. I was saved. I had enough. I had enough to get through a little bit. I knew I was going to get on a boat that had stores. If I needed to buy something, I could. I knew that we were going to go into some ports, that we were going to have shops, and that if I needed to buy something, I could. So when he came back to tell me that our luggage was still in Toronto, by the way, and that it was going to take a few days because even when it got to Tahiti, then it had to get from Tahiti to wherever the boat was. So we were going to be a couple of days without luggage. And we got on the bus with our carry-on only, and I started to watch other people struggling with all these bags of luggage. And I thought, carry-on only. And we got on the boat and we looked at each other and said, well, we don't need to unpack because we have nothing to unpack. So we were able to immediately go out and explore the boat. And I realized, similar to, I guess, the Steve Jobs story, was that there was really no stress when it came to what was I going to wear. I didn't have a choice. I had two pairs of shorts. I was wearing one, so I guess I'm wearing the other one tomorrow. I had one bathing suit. That was the bathing suit I was going to wear. And I thought, is there anybody on this boat that's going to say, remember that cruise we went on to where that woman from Canada wore the same bathing suit every day? Not a chance. And I had two dresses. So if I wore the red dress tonight to dinner, I was wearing the green dress tomorrow. Easy peasy. When our luggage showed up, like quite near the end of our trip, I realized now I had choice and now I had stress because now I could decide if I'm wearing the white dress or the green dress or the red dress or the blue dress, because of course I've overpacked. But the point is that when I tell my story about my vacation, I do not fixate on how horrible it was that I lost my luggage. I fixate on how wonderful that trip was, all the amazing things that we did, all the beautiful things that we saw. What has happened here is that I've changed my mindset. And when we change our mindset, we start to make better decisions. We start to understand what some of our rules are. And then when we understand what our rules are, we can start to make some very, very small changes to create some better habits. And one of the things I want you to sort of take away from this is that every behavior that we reward will be repeated, whether that is good behavior or whether that is bad behavior. And the way we change our behavior is that we start to change our mindset. And the way we change our mindset is just to start with small baby steps. So let me tell you what are some of the changes that you can make that are going to help you create better habits. And they're really, really small. And let me give you an example of how I make small changes become big things. A lot of times when I'm coaching a new program and I've got people that have signed up, but we're not starting for a little bit, a couple of days, maybe a week or so, I'll say to those folks, here's what I want you to do. And I challenge you to do this. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to find an activity that you could do and that you need to do every day that takes 10 minutes or less to do. But if you didn't do that activity, nobody would notice. 10 minutes a day needs to be done every day. But if you didn't do it, nobody would notice. So my example, and one that I have continued to use over the years, is making my bed. It takes less than 10 minutes, definitely. It might take me less than a minute and a half to make my bed. And if I didn't do it every day, well, I could just close my bedroom door and nobody would notice. The only people that would know that the bed didn't get made that day would be me and my husband. And what that has done is it has raised my self-esteem because I've made a promise to myself that I'm going to make my bed every day. And every time I make that bed, I have completed a promise to myself. I have honored a promise to myself. And just by doing that, your self-esteem goes up. So when we're talking about moving into better habits for health, we really want to talk about what are the small things that we can do? What are the promises that we can make to ourselves on a daily basis? So that when we do complete that promise, when we do complete that habit, our self-esteem changes. And our change in self-esteem is going to sustain us far longer than our willpower ever could. So let's talk about some of the changes that you can make right now that are really, really tiny. My first question to you is, if I asked you, what is the number one element that people need, that you as a human being need to survive? What might you say to that? Now, some people might say, well, you need food. And we do. But that's not the number one element. The number one, we can survive without food for days and weeks and even months. You've heard of people who are on, who are fasting or on a hunger strike. They can last quite a long time without food. So it's a requirement, but it's not the number one requirement. And then some of you might think, well, we need water, right? We need water. And absolutely, we must have water to survive. But it's not the number one element. And in fact, we could go a day or two without water. It's not a good thing, but we could manage. What is the number one element we need to survive? The number one element we need to survive is air. We need to breathe. And I want to talk to you about changing your breathing habits. And you're going to say, Kim, I breathe. We all breathe. You showed us with the willpower example that we need to breathe. We all breathe every day. But the problem that we are finding is that people don't breathe properly. Today, unlike our nomadic ancestors from Africa, we tend to be very stationary, very sedentary, and a lot of us sit at desks. We sit at desks, our shoulders are hunched over, we're working on a computer, and we're breathing into the top half of our lungs only. We don't actually ever fill our lungs up. So my first challenge for you, my first tip for you is to breathe properly. And we have an example in WildFit where we call it box breathing, or 5 by 5 by 5 by 5 breathing. And that exercise entails inhaling your breath, filling your lungs into your diaphragm to a count of 5, holding your breath to a count of 5, and then exhaling slowly, getting all of that air out to a count of 5, and then holding that empty space for another count of 5. So there's your box. And realistically, we would like you to do that as a set of 5. So do that exercise 5 times. Do that 3 times at least a day. My recommendation would be do it in the morning when you wake up, do it in the evening before you go to bed, and then find somewhere in the middle to do it. And you can do it more than 3 times, absolutely. And you can do it more than 5 repetitions in a set, absolutely. That's the bare minimum. I have sticky notes. I have sticky notes on my fridge, and I have sticky notes in my bathroom, and I have sticky notes in my car reminding me to breathe properly. And if you're feeling a little bit of anxiety or stress, then I would suggest that'd be a great time to stop pause, and do a set of box breathing. So your number one tip, the first thing you should be doing is to be making sure that you get as much breath in as you can, good habits around breathing, because it is the number one thing as human beings that we need to survive. As I mentioned earlier, the number two thing that we need is water. We need to be adding more and more water to our diets because most of us are dehydrated. Most of us do not drink the amount of water that we should be drinking on a daily basis. Well, how do you do that? There's a lot of tips around that. One is to carry a water bottle with you almost everywhere you go. Everywhere I go, there is a bottle or of water somewhere. In my house, in my car, at my desk at work, no matter where, there's water. You all probably have smartphones or a smartwatch. You can certainly program into those little reminders that you should be drinking some water, maybe once an hour. Have a little bit of a reminder. Have you had your water today? Have you had water this hour? And some people I know love those really big water bottles that are clear that show how much you have drunk in the course of a day. So they fill it all the way up and then they can watch their progress all the way through the day. You also can do things like sticky notes. Breathe, drink water. Breathe, drink water. Great, great ideas. Some of our water, in fact, a lot of our water, can be actually eaten. But in order to do that, that means making sure you're getting whole foods, fresh vegetables, and fresh fruit. Most of our fruits, most of our vegetables are very water dense. So if you're not adding in water, then you should be at least trying to eat things that have water. And that means not eating convenient foods, fast foods, potato chips. They all have no water in them. My next tip is something that I like to call pattern interrupt. And what that means is that when you get those cravings for potato chips or for chocolate, or it's a certain point of the day and you always have something at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever it is, whenever you find that you're getting into that rule again where you eat a certain thing at a certain time or you have a craving for a certain thing, I want you to pause. And I'm not saying don't eat that thing. What I am saying is give yourself 15 minutes. Stop for 15 minutes. Don't go and grab that item. Instead, do some breathing exercises, have some water, and wait out 15 minutes. Now, what you might find is that at the end of the 15 minutes, you no longer have that craving, or you no longer desire that food, or you're not hungry, because sometimes it's like, but at 3 o'clock I get hungry and I got to eat. You might not really be hungry. In fact, what you might have been is thirsty. So if you have some water, quite a significant amount of water, you might find that you're not hungry any longer and that craving has gone away. So just pause and wait it out for 15 minutes and see what happens. And then finally, I really want you to start when you're going to the grocery store is reading the labels. One of the things that the food industry has done as part of its manipulation is it has added sugar into absolutely every item that they produce. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but most items. And not only have they added sugar, they have actually broken sugar down into about 65 different names. And they won't label things necessarily as sugar. They might label it as dextrose or maltodextrose or high fructose corn syrup. There are a variety of things that are really truly sugar, even though they're not being labeled as sugar. And you'll see things that'll be labeled sugar-free, but if you go and you look at the back and you look at the ingredients label, you'll notice that while they don't list sugar, they have listed sugar in another form. So really pay attention. Look for things that don't have sugar. And I want you to, as you're looking at those labels and you're realizing all of the things that the food industry has put into products that we often buy, I want you to kind of get a little angry because, it's not you, it's them. They have tricked us, they have manipulated us. And we need to take this opportunity to make some changes, perhaps to the way the food industry does business, but more importantly, to our own health and to the foods that we're eating. I would recommend that you stay away as much as possible from things that are processed, ultra processed, in fact. So anything that comes in a can, a box, or a jar, maybe those are things that you can start to give up. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a different way of getting those products or making those products. And start looking at whole foods, fruits and vegetables, good quality meats when you can. My final tip for you is that you find a community, find like-minded people who are also interested in changing their health, improving their nutrition. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Find people that have similar interests to you and who can support you and who you can also support. There are groups of people out there. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's some friends that you have. Maybe it's some colleagues at work. Wherever it is, find your tribe, find your community. I really want to thank you for joining me today and listening to me. And I hope that I've given you some tips that you can take away and start to use right now. I will leave up on the screen my contact information if you're interested in reaching out and learning more about what I do, what programs I run, or even just to chat about your health and your nutrition. Thank you.